John chapter 1 in our first session in these new books. And today is really, it's only 14 verses, but it's very simple. It's very plain talk. There's not much analyzing that needs to be done, so we'll still go through the book, but a lot of it's pretty easily understood. But it starts out there, the title of this lesson is In the Beginning, and it says, many people think of Bethlehem as the beginning place for Jesus. The baby of Bethlehem was the eternal God who took on human flesh to save human beings. But again, we know we're here in the church. If you've been to church enough times in your life, you know that the same baby that was born there was here from the get-go, from the beginning. Right? You got God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. He was here. But we do tend at, December, we start looking and talking about the manger and Bethlehem. But that same God, He's been here the whole time. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. And on that Understand the Context page, it says, John, who wrote the Gospel, was raised with his brother James in Bethsaida on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Their father Zebedee owned a fishing business. And then one day, while James and John were preparing the fishing nets with their father, Jesus called the two to follow him. Can't prove this here, but it says some biblical scholars believe John was the youngest of the 12 apostles. So, kind of setting the background as we read here in John. So him and his brother are out there throwing their nets out, and, a guy's walking by, and just so happens to be Jesus, and he says, I'm imagining, though, that he had probably, said some things, maybe a sermon or talked some things that caught their attention and says, now follow me. And they do, right? Would we do that? There's multiple people we see here that just didn't have the desire to follow him. Would we have that type of faith in that time? But it says John did not begin his gospel with the birth narrative, but by declaring Jesus to be God. His prologue, in these verses we're going to be talking about today, contains 4 evidences of Jesus' deity. First, he was and is eternal. While Jesus took on flesh and dwelt among us, he existed as God before time began. Again, a concept we don't understand. We look at time, and to God, we can't even understand his time. And we always have, it happens a lot of times in Vacation Bible School. Kids will be like, well, who created God? Somebody had to make God. No, God was here from the beginning. And there's things that are just hard for our human mind to understand and wrap our head around, but God is the beginning. God's the end. He's every bit of it. Nobody created God. He was just God. It says, second, Jesus is the creator. Third, God sent forth a special witness, who we'll talk about today, John the Baptist, to prepare the way for Jesus. And it says a fourth, the deity of Christ can be found in his incarnation. The Word took on human flesh and dwelt among the people for whom he would die. As one of the 12, John had seen him with his eyes, touched him, heard him, and walked with him for over 3 years. John was a first-hand witness of the incarnate God who lived among his people. So, for people that really just are completely lost and, have no understanding at all, a lot would like to say, that Jesus is just some myth. Well, for those people, that are just completely way out of line and maybe don't even have any kind of understanding, you can set them aside real quick and just teach them and say, hey, even Western civilization in college will teach you that Jesus was a real person. So there's no thing about him being a myth. And these people writing here were right there with him. I mean, it's a first-hand account. It would be like us following somebody and then writing a biography about him, right? So we know that Jesus really walked this earth. I mean, we can prove that. And a lot of people will even admit that. It's just, do you believe that he is the Savior? Do you believe that he died on that cross and rose again? That's what, as the saying likes to be, is they separate the boys from the men, right? That's when you separate real believers versus non-believers. Do you have that faith on him? But going ahead, getting right into the scriptures, we'll start out John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Common verses here. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So in those 5 verses, if you put it in, Connor Hooper vernacular, it would be pretty much, God's the only one. He did everything. He made everything, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And that's kind of what he's saying there. Anything that's on this earth, God put it here. It was him. And it says, in the beginning were words that Jewish readers would have instantly associated with the opening words of the book of Genesis. Jews commonly referred to the books of the Bible by their first few words, thus they call Genesis in the beginning. And we know, and we'll talk about it here in a few verses today, about how ultimately they're the ones that rejected him, right? They didn't, as it says, they didn't receive him not. But it says, John wrote not merely to give an account of Jesus' life and ministry. He wrote so that his readers might believe and experience life eternal and abundant. And in the beginning was the Word, affirms that the Word's existence from eternities past. It says, John also answered Greek philosophical thought, which taught that the Word, in Greek logos, was abstract and impersonal. And again, people today believe that it's just words. How many times do you hear people talk about the Bible and say, it's just a book penned by men, right? That's what we'll hear. When ultimately, as Christians, we know that's not true. Men may have physically wrote the words, but it was inspired by God, right? He told them exactly what needed to be said, where it needed to be said. Every single letter, apostrophe, period, whatever you want to call it, every bit of that is God inspired. And we need to believe that. We don't need to think it was just randomly put here, right? It says, to say the Word was with God affirmed that the Word's existence prior to creation. John made a final connection of the Word's eternal existence by saying the Word was God. So the Word was with him. The Word is him. Again, it's all centered back to Christ. Every bit of it. He is the Word. And as Christians today, we need to be living that Word. People need to look at us, and we're not Jesus. We're never going to be Jesus. We're never going to be that. I'm not trying to say that. But our goal should be to live as much like him as we can. People should see Christ in us. That's how we should be living. Verse 3, though, it says, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. It says made there a lot, but what it's saying is every bit of it was made by him. Nothing on this earth wasn't put here but by him. It says the Word made all things, and John's declaration again echoes Genesis 1, which states, in the beginning God created. And Genesis 1:1 shows his dual nature because he is and he does. And then here, verses 3 through 5, it says John introduced words that serve as themes in his gospel. Life, light, and darkness. These themes represent both the promise and the problem of creation, of God's new creation. So, God gives us life if we believe on him, right? We are that light. But, right, with a light, there's always an opposite. There's a darkness. That darkness is the world that is absolutely just against him. The lost world. People that don't believe in him. We know there's a right and wrong. We know there's a heaven and a hell. It says Jesus came as light because humans are prone to wander in the darkness. John 3:19 says, light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. We were in that dark until salvation, whether we believe it or not. Some, get saved real young. I was 10. So you like to think you're a kid, you're not doing anything. I mean, how are you evil? How are you walking in the dark? But until you know Christ in reality, when you become of that age to understand anything in that gap, you're in the dark. You're in just blunt terms, you're hell-bound if you don't believe on him. And that world out there is very dark. It may look light out here. But again, I use this analogy. If we could look over from space and see and say the Christians had lights on their heads, we would see some lights very sporadic all throughout the world. It wouldn't be, just all lit up. It looked very dark. And that's why we're here as Christians. That's why we're put on this earth. God's allowed us to be here. We believe on him, and now we're out to serve that mission of making sure that people know about him. You know, like I said, this lesson today is very simple for the Christian. It's something we hear every single time we walk in a church, to go out and make disciples. But that's what this whole Bible is about. You know, it all turns back to, how do we get more people to understand that Jesus Christ is the only way? And you know, times have changed with how that works. You know, back then, they didn't have text messages. You know, they didn't have emails. They had to physically walk places. So, in a sense, I wouldn't even say in a sense, I think technology is good and it's bad, but God's allowed us, if it's there, we need to be using it to glorify Him. And really, we have more tools at our disposal than these guys back then did, yet it still seems like they were more successful sometimes than we are, right? They were able just to walk. They didn't have, you know, insulated boots or hot hands and things like that. I mean, they just went, right? And we, you know, sometimes, I like to say, first world problems, we like to make things, oh, we can't do it, you know. No, I mean, we can travel in cars. We can set up social media pages. We can reach people. We just have to do it. Verse 6 here, it says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. The same came for a witness, to bear the witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. So John's kind of reiterating here, talking about John the Baptist. John's been sent here to serve as a witness. But he clarifies too in verse 8, though. He's making it clear. I'm not raising John the Baptist above anybody, saying he is the one that you need to worship. I'm telling you that he is sent to tell you of the one that we need to be looking for, that we need to be serving. In establishing the background for the arrival of the light, John the Gospel writer first introduced John the Baptizer. John was sent from God, as had occurred with Abraham and Sarah in the Old Testament. John the Baptist's parents, Zechariah and Elizabeth, conceived when they were older. And with John the Baptist, God was introducing his new covenant. Jews would have recognized that John's being sent was a fulfillment of Malachi's prophecy about sending a messenger to clear the way for the Messiah. So, you know, again, we got prophecies lining up. And one thing that's always intrigued me, I'm sure Joey could know more about it and talk more about it, but, you know, his own people, the Jews, rejected him. Yet they knew these scriptures probably just as elegantly as you could. I mean, they understood it, and things were lining up, yet they still rejected it. You know, I don't understand that, but it kind of lines up, I guess, with what you could say our world is today. There are things in here that just parallel and just looks like we're living in it today. How can people just be so ignorant to ignore it? You know, I don't know. But we're here, and I guess, you know, we don't need to be questioning that and just say it is the world we live in, and we just need to keep going and doing what God tells us to do, and He'll correct it however He needs to. It says, throughout John's Gospel, more of these witnesses step forward with the same intent. But not only did John the Baptizer have a message, he had a mission that all men through him might believe. The mission hadn't changed. Same thing with us. Our goal should be that everybody that we come into contact has heard about Jesus from us. It's up to them if they believe on Him. That's what they have to deal with. But we don't need to leave this earth. And, you know, in our last few moments, we're sitting here thinking, well, how many people did we talk to about and tell them about Jesus? You know, that would be a failed mission on our part. And you know, that's just the reality. We don't want to be that way. I know I can speak for myself, probably speak for all of us without bashing every one of us. We're not talking to people about Jesus as much as we should. If we were, these pews would probably be filled. You know? We all fall short of that. We always use that analogy, and I'll say it again. There was probably double the cars in Waffle House than the people we got in here right now, right? And don't get me wrong, I like to eat too, but should have got up earlier if they wanted to do that, right? You know, it's not saying we're better than people. It's not saying that if you're at home and you're listening to us, not saying that. But there's something about being in the church, and it's something that I think there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing non-biblical about it. When people say, well, I don't have to go to church. You know what? You're right. I'm not going to disagree with you. There's nothing that says you have to. But there's multiple scriptures that tell us that it's good to be in fellowship, right, with other believers. So why not be here? It says, using repetition, John's gospel declared emphatically that the baptizer was not that light himself. So again, he makes it clear, just as we need to do when people try to get put on pedestals. No. John the Baptist is just the one, he's out here too telling the message. Light and life came only through the one he would soon baptize. And like John, believers are messengers sent to tell others about the light. Being a witness for Jesus is not complicated. I like that. We simply tell others what we have discovered about him, how he brought life and light into our lives, and how he can do the same for them. It's true, it's not complicated. We just make it complicated. And a lot of that is just our world has done it. You know, sometimes, going back to Vacation Bible School, you know, I think sometimes we can make kids overthink it sometimes too much. And you'll see too, some churches, they want to almost push them to, well, yeah, oh, you feel, yeah, you got saved then. No, that's not it. You know, if nobody gets saved in Vacation Bible School, that don't mean it was a failure. There's a lot of seeds planted. Right. You know, we don't need to look at it that way. It's not a numbers game. Mm-hmm. It's in reality a heart game of how many people did we really plant a seed in their heart that, you know, maybe one day it comes back to them. You know, that's the way we need to look at life. It's not our job to get everybody saved, but it is our job to make sure they know how to be saved. Mm-hmm. That's right. Verse 9. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. I'm going to go ahead and read through 14 here. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. In short there, Jesus was here, and the world didn't want to know him. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. So his own people rejected him. But as verse 12 says, if they did receive him, if they believed on him, he gave them some powers. He gave them the ability to go out. They could do things in his name. Verse 13, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. It says, picking up on the theme of the word as light, John described him as the true light. And the word true carries the idea of being authentic, dependable, and complete. There's a lot of things out there that like to pretend that they are the way. Now, there's a lot of Christian authors out there, Christian musicians, they sell their products, and I'm not saying that they are not believers, but ultimately, if you're trying to sell something to get people to believe on the Lord, you're not doing it for his purpose. Because there was never a sermon that I could find where he charged an admission fee to get in, right? That's right. No, because salvation is free. You just have to believe on it. There's no physical money charge. And when I say that, it's really not free. Jesus paid a price. He paid the price of dying on the cross. But from a monetary standpoint of what we look at, it don't cost anything. The richest man in the world can be saved, and the poorest man who don't have a dime to his name can be saved. It's just truly believing on him. And that's why, to me, I mean, for anybody that's out there possibly listening and they're trying to find, well, where am I mixed? I'm mixed up. I don't know who to believe. Look at it. Go look at all these other religions. There's things you have to do and things you got to keep doing to stay in that person's, their view of salvation. That don't work. It's not that way with Jesus, right? You don't need anything but just believing on him. That's all you have to do. And after that, you're going to know if you're saved just by how your conscience is going to work. You're not going to get saved and get up from that and say, all right, I'm going to go back doing what I was doing, No. Your heart, your mind is going to truly change. And when you do things wrong, it's going to prick you. You're going to think, I don't need to be doing that. That's going to bother you. That's one thing that I've always said to people that may be questioning their salvation. Because there's no doubt about it. I think even in my life, everybody goes through doubts. I mean, that happens. But I would say, if you're having those doubts, and you're doing things and nothing's even bothering you really, and I would be checking myself. Because when you get saved, I feel like it's just, some type of permanent mark on you that God allows you to have there that says, hey, you're mine, and when you're going against me, I'm going to let you know it. And still, it's up to you to change it. Can't lose your salvation, but you can damage your witness. You can damage other believers' witnesses around you that go to church with you, things like that. Being a Christian is important. It's more important of a vow, really, that you stand here and take when you're getting married. You're telling that person, I'm going to, be with you through thick and thin. I'm going to be with you in sickness and health. That's a vow you're making between God. When you take salvation, you're saying, I represent you now, Christ. Everything I do will come back and reflect on you. And people will look at it as you. If we were all out here as Christians and just ripping and roaring and doing whatever we wanted, do you think anybody would want to be a part of that? Well, to be honest with you, yeah, the world would want to be a part of it. They'd say, all right, if that's what being a Christian is, let's go, let's do it, right? But you get what I'm saying. Everything we do, our world has this mentality, and the Bible completely teaches you against this mentality, but the world has the mentality, and we hear our friends even say it. I ain't worried what anybody thinks of me. I'll do what I want to do. It's my life, Nobody tells me. You can believe that way if you want to. But the way people look at you, and they can see your life, it reflects. Don't have that attitude of, I don't care what people think. Because ultimately, from a Christian standpoint of view, no. If they're against me because I'm believing on the Lord and they hate me, that's fine. But if I'm just trying to be buddy-buddy and I don't care what anybody else thinks and I'm just doing what I want, no. That's not the way it works. There's accountability in being a Christian. It says, true light lighteth every man. And John was not claiming that all would embrace that light. In fact, they wouldn't. Rather, he was explaining that the light was intended for all and would be available for all to embrace. We know that not everybody is going to believe on this. Not to be somber and mourning, but think about it. There are people that we're going to come in contact with this week. Possibly we work with them, they'll be our friends. People we're going to come in contact with that will be in hell one day because they do not believe and will not believe by their own choice. And there's people we're going to come in contact with today that are going to be in heaven because they want to serve God's army. It's brutal facts, but it's things that even Jesus knew, right? As they're up there throwing him on a cross, he's all-knowing. But we have free will to choose. He knew that those guys, some of them killing him, were never going to enter into his kingdom. He knew that. But he also knew there was going to be people, there's going to be one beside him up there that would be. It's sad to think, and you think, I think of it like this sometimes, I think about that. I'm a deep thinker sometimes, and I get off on rabbit holes, but I think, as Jesus is up there, he's dying for the whole world, and he's told them the whole time he's been out there preaching, walking, the earth. He's been telling them. And they're throwing him up there on that cross, and really, they're wanting him to die as quick as possible. And in his mind, I'm wondering if he's thinking, the last thing you want me to do is to die on this cross. Now, I'm going to resurrect in a few days, but I've been telling y'all, and y'all aren't listening to me, and you are going to be in a hell because you think it's so beneficial to kill me right now. I don't know. I don't know what he was thinking. But, it's so sad that that's what our world is today. They just absolutely have no desire to believe in God. Yeah. And I don't understand it. I can't comprehend it. Because they can believe in all these other things that take, to me, more faith to believe what they believe than what we believe. But hey, we got to keep pushing. Just like I said, I can't be a hypocrite and just say we're sitting here questioning. We got to keep pushing. But it says John typically used the word world not to describe the planet, but to refer to the realm where people live, with the emphasis being on the people fallen, rebellious, and immoral people. So when we see that, not just him, a lot of times when we see in the world in the Bible, it's talking about the lost world. You're either of Christ or you're of the world. And I can tell you, being of the world is going to be more popular for you right now. But if you want 70 years of popularity and friends versus an eternity in pain and agony and burning, that's your choice. But you're going to have to live with that. You're going to have to live with that. I prefer just, to people not really like me that much and let me be on my own and want me gone for 70 years to know I'm going to have an eternity of good, of greatness, being with Him. It says John moved from the larger context of the world and zeroed in on the Jews as a whole because what? Going back to the scripture here, it says they received Him not. Again, they rejected Him. They even ask, what's this man done, We'll give him back up to you. No. Kill him. Kill him. Get him out of here. And to me, they rejected Him. Some still do today. But for them to want Him dead so bad, they knew, they didn't know Him. When I say this, I'm about to sound really confusing. They didn't know Him from a salvation standpoint. But they had to know. I mean, why do you want to kill somebody so bad if they're not a threat? It was affecting their way of life. It was telling them the truth, telling them what they needed to do. It was affecting all their traditions. They didn't like that. It says Christians often speak of Jesus' incarnation, which refers to His coming to earth in human form. It says God's Son stepped across the threshold of eternity to dwell among us. And the Greek word translated dwell literally means to tabernacle and to set up His residence with us. In the Old Testament, the Hebrews understood the tabernacle to be the location where God met His people. And in the same way, the Word who became flesh and dwelt among us was and is the center of God's presence for His people. So you think about this. You got all these monarchies and kings and queens and they rule for centuries. The whole family rules for centuries. And, they just are, boom, they're so historical, right? Jesus Christ walks this earth for 33 years. We're still talking about Him 2,000 years later, right? Again, shows His power. Yeah, it's like an underdog status. He is not an underdog by no means. But the world looks at it that way because they think, hey, we're silencing them. We're canceling them. We're getting all these court victories. We're putting them away. And God's just, standing here, still here today. And, He's thinking to Himself, insanity. They have no idea that I could just end this right now. Right? He's got to be the most patient person in the world, right? Because none of us, we would just say, we're over with it. No. And I think, again, another reason if somebody's saying, why go back? Again, He's patient. There's not going to be a time, there's not going to be any excuse, period. There's not going to be any excuse somebody's going to have not know Him. But for sure, there's not going to be an excuse, well, I didn't have enough time. Nobody told me this. I'm not going to have that excuse. It says, John could remember when he laid aside his nets and when he saw the blind, crippled, and deaf healed, saw dead raised to life, and saw Jesus transfigured. And standing beside Moses and Elijah, John could remember Jesus' glory, which the Father had manifested in His only begotten Son, who came to reveal God's grace and truth. So you got to remember, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, they walked right with Him. This is their accounts. This is them writing it to so the world can see. Jew, Gentile, whoever. And, I would encourage, if somebody says, and they're asking, where do I need to start? I don't necessarily have that exact answer for you. I can't tell you chronologically how this all goes. But I would say Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John is probably any good place if you just want to direct somebody, because these people walk directly with Him. And you can see a lot of Jesus' direct words right in those scriptures. It says, the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us, revealing God's glory, was the exact opposite of the Greek and Roman gods that were imaginary, unapproachable, and unknowable. I read just that sentence today, and again, that's not the Bible, that's this author's analysis, but I thought about something that I'd never thought about in my life. and to show you how blinded we are. And you're going to say, Connor, you're taking it to a whole nother level. That's too deep. You're getting crazy. And y'all are okay. You can have that opinion. That's fine, because maybe I am. But I thought about this. In middle school, we learned about Greek and Roman gods and all that stuff. And I started thinking, I grew up in I'd like to say at least a decent enough family. I went to church enough to know this is just all mythical. This is imaginary. But I would say probably 90% of people don't go to church. Let's be nice and say 75%. So I start thinking and saying, well, that means 3/4 of my class don't necessarily know that's mythical because they weren't taught right from wrong. And we're learning about that in our schools, about Greek and Roman gods and all these. Why are we learning that? There's no substance to it at all. It's imaginary. We're admitting it's imaginary and we're learning about it. But again, it's completely opposite. Jesus was completely opposite of these things. These were things you couldn't even see. We're going to pray to this sun god, or maybe this underwater god, and they're going to, what? You could pray to that. You got faith to pray in that you've never saw, and it sure wasn't giving you no blessings. But you can't believe on somebody that's physically right there that walked and is telling you and performing miracles and showing everything. It's mind-boggling. And again, faith is believing in it, without even seeing it. But Jesus Christ himself, again, even gave a brownie point, an extra advantage to those that were there and said, hey, you know what? I can show you. I can prove to you. If you're doubting, I can prove to you. Who else can do this? Who else can make somebody blind see? How do you not believe in it? Especially if you walk there. How do you not believe that? God's only Son came to earth in human form, and he invites us to follow him and behold his glory as he works in our lives and in our midst. Going back, though, it was in the beginning was the Word. He is the Word. And it's up to us to keep that Word alive and to keep it going through generation after generation, because eventually, we got maybe 10 people in here. And you know what? Let's just be reality. Let's be realistic, y'all. I'm not a fake type person. More than likely, if this earth is still here in 75 years, not just this church, there are going to be a lot of doors shut because there's not going to be anybody. There's not going to be anybody. I'm not going to stand here and be fake. We don't have anybody under the age of 30 really that regularly comes to church. And that's sad. It's sad. But we can't just because these doors may close, we can't let that word die. Right? I think I look at my own kids, because your own kids better than anybody. But you ain't got to physically be in a church to teach them, right? I can see it through Kelson. She still watches even the YouTube videos and all. You can show them enough about Jesus if these doors close, but you can keep it going. And that is so important. Because you look at it. If our kids learn, Lennox, Kelson, Sophia and them, boom, we've bought another 30 or 40 years in that family to keep that word going. And that's what we got to keep doing, because eventually, when it's dwindled down and there's nobody left, the world really is going to be in a mess. And, we talk about it being a scary world now. We really do feel bad for the people living in those times. Right. We talked about last week about how we feel bad for the kids of this generation. And it is sad, because it's so sad that nobody's getting taught about Jesus like they should be. They're not in church like they should be. But what's even more sad is that they're getting brought into this world and nobody's necessarily caring for them from a spiritual standpoint. What did I say a minute ago? There's not going to be excuses. When that kid gets to that age, they're here. Yeah. They're here. And they've got to answer. And there's not going to be an excuse of, well, you didn't know, or nobody told me. So it's up to us to keep his word, to keep going. It's never going to die. It's never going to die. We know that. But think about us right now. Think about those countries that are, maybe 0.5% Christianity. And those people, sadly, are in hiding, because if they get caught with the Bible, they're going to get their head cut off. Yeah. So they're trying to do God's work, but can't. They can't physically, because they're just, they know. And that's what those countries intend to do. Their thought is absolutely a logical thought. Their thought is if we can kill as many Christians as we can stop it from spreading in our country. And some have successfully done it in their mindset. They may have stopped it physically, but they're going to have to pay for that one day. Because God don't like when people are trying to push people to hell and not to Him, and that's what they're doing. If you're trying to silence God, you're trying to help people get to hell quicker. So let's stay positive, though. Let's keep His Word going, and we'll see what we got next week. Anybody got anything?
Well, I think the church is growing, and especially over in the Middle East and all over there, Iran, China. You're hearing about the underground churches; they're really growing. And when the church is persecuted, it makes them strong. It really is. And I'm afraid we're going to face some of that too.
Yeah, I think, and I'm guilty of it too sometimes. And they may be coming at us from, a law standpoint. We haven't got to complete anarchy yet. But we're not like these countries where they don't even make laws. They just say, laws? We'll just kill you. We're not to that point yet. So we're still living in a blessed enough place that we ain't getting thrown in jail yet. Yet. All right. Anybody else? Joe, you want to close us out?
I will. Lord, we thank you for this day and for the opportunity to be in your house one more time. Lord, thank you for this lesson that we've heard here this morning, these words. We thank you for Connor and his family, what they mean to our church and our lives. Watch over, keep and bless them. Lord, use these words, this lesson. Lord, in our lives, Lord, that we might do more for you. God, put our faith and trust in you in all things, in every aspect of your word, hide it in our heart. And we might be found doing your will. Lord, go with us through the rest of the service, we ask. Lord, as we lift our voice in song and praise to you. Lord, as we open the word this morning, as we study it, allow the Holy Spirit to teach us all that we stand in need of. Lead us, guide us, direct us for your name's sake, in your name.